My boyfriend and I were preparing for our wedding when the night before, my drunk ex, a military man, showed up at our door. I vividly recall the evening my ex, Andrew, first entered my life, a moment that took place in the most unexpected setting, a crowded, stifling classroom on a Friday afternoon, right after our teacher announced the volunteer project pairings for our final high school semester. I was leaning against a desk, silently counting the seconds until the bell would free me, when he approached with an outstretched hand and an awkward, sheepish grin. We both laughed about our mutual disinterest in the project, and from that instant, an undeniable spark, an almost electric energy, ignited between us. In those early days, we were both young and full of grand, dramatic fantasies about love. We spent hours chatting after school, exchanging endless text messages about everything and nothing, and wandering through the park, daydreaming about futures so fantastical they felt like something out of a fairy tale. In those moments, Andrew was more than just a boyfriend. He was a best friend who looked at me with genuine curiosity, making me laugh with his goofy dances and offhand jokes. In retrospect, I realized we were both more in love with the idea of love itself than with each other. Our relationship officially blossomed that summer, a time that bridged our final days of high school and the uncertain beginning of our adult lives. At that point, neither of us had a clear plan for the future. I eventually decided to pursue a university education in another city, while Andrew, after taking a few months off, drifted between part-time jobs, never quite certain of his ambitions. In the beginning, I found his free-spirited nature charming, a sign of a soul unwilling to be tethered. However, as I honed my academic focus, his lack of direction began to worry me. I started to fear the growing chasm between us. I was determined to leave our hometown, while he seemed perfectly content to linger, dabbling in new things without ever committing. Even as our differences became more apparent, we stayed together for 2 years. There were afternoons when I adored him, when his jokes sent me into fits of laughter and he remembered the smallest details that made me feel seen. But there were also bitter days filled with quarrels so fierce that I would hide away in the bathroom, tears streaming down my face, questioning why we clung to a bond that felt increasingly unstable. Looking back now, I see that we were simply young and inexperienced, clinging to the comfort of each other without the tools to navigate the challenges of adulthood. Eventually, as my departure for university loomed closer, it became painfully clear that neither of us was willing to put in the necessary work to overcome the distance. After a heated argument the night before, we woke to a quiet resignation and mutually agreed that our relationship was over. There were tears and heartbreak, especially on his part, but there was also a resolute finality in that morning silence. I packed my things, said my goodbyes, and stepped into the next chapter of my life. In the following weeks, I found myself thinking of him occasionally, especially on lonely nights in my new dorm. But gradually, he faded into the background, as I absorbed the lessons of heartbreak, immaturity, and the turbulent nature of young love. Fast forward 5 years, and my life had veered onto a completely different track. I had finished my studies, secured a job that I was passionate about, and forged friendships with people who truly understood experiences I never had back in my small hometown. Most importantly, I met Ryan, the man who would eventually become my fiancé. From the moment we met, his steady, kind, and unerringly patient presence made me feel secure. We encountered each other at a campus seminar during my final year, initially as study partners huddled over endless economics assignments in a noisy library fueled by too much coffee and shared laughter that quickly melted away any awkwardness. By semester's end, we spent nearly every weekend together, cooking in my cramped apartment, taking spontaneous trips to local museums, and strolling along the riverbank as we watched the city lights dance on the water. For the first time, I was with someone who truly saw me, accepted all my flaws and fears, and was eager to face the future by my side. The proposal was as sweet and intimate as our budding relationship. During a picnic at the very riverbank where we had one of our earliest dates, Ryan presented me with a simple, elegant ring and, with a voice that choked me up, asked, "I just want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" I said yes immediately, overwhelmed by tears and a trembling smile that lingered for hours. From that moment, we began to map out a shared future, dreaming of a quiet wedding with a few dozen loved ones, perhaps in a garden or an old vineyard. By then, we had been living together for several months, and our little apartment had transformed into a warm, joyful home. I often find myself marveling at how different Ryan is from Andrew. Where Andrew was quick to anger and often seemed lost, Ryan exudes calm patience and a quiet sense of direction without ever feeling constricted. He has always been supportive and understanding, never making me feel judged when I spoke about my dreams. Our nights turned into deep conversations about our careers, possibility of children, or even the idea of living abroad for a while to experience new cultures. Everything felt possible with it, and I had never been more sure of a decision than I was about marrying Ryan. Then, on an otherwise unremarkable evening, The past reared its head in the most unexpected way. Ryan and I were finishing dinner, lounging on our couch in our pajamas and debating which movie to watch, when the doorbell rang, its sound echoing through our living room. We exchanged puzzled glances. No one was expecting a visitor. Ryan rose to answer the door, and I followed out of curiosity. When he opened the door, I was stunned. There stood Andrew, his hair disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, a tie hanging askew as though it had lost a battle. The stench of alcohol clung to him, and my heart leapt into my throat as I instinctively stepped back. Ryan's concerned glance met mine as Andrew stood there, blinking slowly until tears began streaming down his face. Sobbing incoherently, he murmured, "Can't believe he's real. Can't believe you're both real." My mind raced with confusion. Why was he here? How did he know my address? What had driven him to come at that moment? Ever the peacemaker, Ryan stepped forward and asked gently, "Hey, are you all right, man? You don't look so good. Do you need help?" Andrew, still in a muddled, desperate state, nodded as though he were a lost child. It was nearly 10 p.m., and given his condition, we quickly decided to let him inside rather than leave him alone in the hallway. We guided him onto our couch, his eyes, half-lidded and teary, fixed on me as he stuttered apologies for past mistakes, confessing that he had never truly gotten over our breakup and believed we might have worked things out if I hadn't left. He mentioned he'd been in the city for his bachelor party, a revelation that sent shockwaves through. Bachelor party? Was he engaged? And if so, why was he at my doorstep? Every word he uttered was soaked in regret and self-pity, and soon he began to stumble, his tears flowing uncontrollably as he attempted to stand, swaying dangerously. Ryan and I exchanged a look, a silent agreement to handle the situation with care. Despite his inebriated state, Andrew did not seem violent, only deeply sorrowful and possibly terrified. I fetched him a glass of water while Ryan gently escorted him to the bathroom, where he promptly vomited, the stench evoking memories of past nights when I'd helped him recover from too many drinks. It was both eerily familiar and profoundly unsettling to see my ex reduced to this state. As I watched, I couldn't summon anger. Instead, I felt a complex mix of pity and disquiet. Ryan, ever calm, asked if Andrew had any numbers for his friends or groomsmen, but Andrew merely shook his head, explaining that they were still out partying and that he didn't want to see them at that moment. Then, unexpectedly, he whispered, "I kept telling them about you, about how I messed it all up, and they said to just let it go. But I couldn't." I tried to respond in a measured tone. "Andrew, that was years ago. I've moved on. You need to do the same. You have someone you're about to marry, right?" My words felt hollow, and he simply lowered his head as the tears continued. Eventually, he announced he was going to call an Uber back to his hotel. We helped him stand, grabbed his phone as he tapped away with trembling fingers, and I insisted he send us a message to confirm he arrived safely. Before he left, he looked at Ryan with a remorseful expression and said, "Take care of her, don't do what I did." Ryan nodded, and together we watched as he was gently guided out. When the door closed and the lock clicked, it felt as though we had exorcised a ghost from our evening. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. I remember swallowing hard, my heart still pounding erratically, and Ryan finally asked, "Are you okay?" I realized then that I was shaking, a tumultuous mix of sadness, confusion, and a faint anger at the intrusion that had disrupted our peaceful night. More than anything, I felt a deep sense of violation, as though I had been dragged into a secret I never wanted to share. We cleaned up the bathroom, tossed the soiled towels into the washer, and Ryan even tried to lighten the mood with a small joke about adding emergency waffle caretaker to his resume. I appreciated his effort, though I remained subdued as we eventually settled back on the couch, my mind replaying Andrew's tear-streaked face and the raw honesty of his drunken apologies. That night, sleep eluded me as I half expected another frantic knock at the door. In a restless dream, I imagined Andrew pounding repeatedly, demanding closure, while his fiancée stood by in anger and betrayal. I awoke drenched in sweat, with Ryan's comforting arms around me as he murmured that it had been just a dream. The next morning, I grappled with the dilemma of whether to inform Andrew's fiancée about his late-night appearance. My moral compass insisted that if I were about to marry someone, I deserved to know if my ex had intruded in such an intimate way. Yet, I was uncertain whether interfering was right. Perhaps Andrew would eventually come clean on his own. Maybe my disclosure would seem like an attempt to sabotage their relationship. Over coffee, I sought Ryan's opinion. After a thoughtful pause, he remarked, "I'd want to know if I were in your shoes, but it isn't really your secret to share." I eventually turned to a few trusted friends for advice. Some argued that I should immediately tell his fiancée, insisting she deserved full transparency. Others counseled caution, suggesting that if Andrew was battling personal demons, it wasn't my responsibility to expose him. A few even warned that doing so might paint me as the meddler trying to ruin their relationship. None of those options were appealing, so I settled on a compromise. I reached out to Andrew's sister, Taylor, someone I used to be close with. I texted her calmly, explaining that Andrew had appeared at my apartment in a drunken, distraught state, and that I wanted someone close to him to be aware so they could check on him. Taylor responded with relief and a hint of embarrassment, apologizing on his behalf and saying that he had been acting erratically for weeks, drinking excessively, launching emotional rants, and causing worry among his friends and family. I felt a small measure of relief, hopeful that his family would keep an eye on him, and I sincerely wished that this was the end of the matter. For a couple of days, that was all. Then, unexpectedly, Taylor called again in a frantic tone, saying that Andrew had not shown up at his wedding ceremony. He had seemingly vanished. Family and friends were scrambling to locate him, and someone even speculated that he might have come back to see me again. "He's not with me," I told Taylor, my heart pounding at the thought that his disappearance might be linked to our strange encounter. Although she believed me, I could detect panic in her voice, and I felt deep sympathy for Taylor, for his fiancée, and for everyone caught in this whirlwind. The following day, I received a call from an unknown number. My intuition told me it might be Andrew's fiancée, and when I answered, a shaky voice demanded to know if Andrew and I had slept together. Her tone was a raw mixture of anger, heartbreak, and desperation. She was convinced there had been some intimate betrayal, citing a rumor from the best man that Andrew had been at my place. For a moment, my own anger flared at the outrageous accusation, but